Okay, and I am going to mainly run the session, although there will be a little bit of me waving things at the camera, by using a thing called a Miro board, which is sort of like an interactive online whiteboard, which I will send you the link to afterwards as well, or Jenny will. And so everything we've looked at, and it's basically it's a giant collection of pictures of my pruning this winter that we can draw all over and have conversations after. So the main idea of this is it's to promote questions from you, because I won't get it right, exactly right first time, in explaining what's in my head to get it into your head. So let's make a start. And as Jenny said, if you've got a question, pop it in the chat, and Jenny will interrupt the process and ask the question. And if we don't understand the question, we might ask you to unmute and ask it face to face. Okay, right, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen now. So I can only see a couple of you now, but Jenny should be able to sort of stretch and squash the screen to see all of you and look at the chat. So this is what I would normally be doing around this time of the year. So this is me, my name's Mark Simmons, and I'm based in Calderdale in West Yorkshire, which was that picture over my shoulder when I was just talking without the screen share. My day job is helping set up co-ops and social enterprises, but as part of that, about 12 years ago now, I started getting involved with community-supported agriculture projects that were using fruit. And as part of that, I ended up going to a lovely fruit project down south called Dragon Orchard near Ledbury. And I went to interview them for a case study, but I ended up involved in a sort of all-night bacchanalia of drinking cider, moonlit parades through the orchard, firing shotguns through the trees of the branches of the trees as part of their wassail. And I thought, this is great, I want to do this back home. And when I came back, I found there was no real orcharding tradition, there was no real apple tradition. I mean, up here we grow sheep and rhubarb, and that's it. So decided to start a local orchard group, and it grew from there. And with my background as a chemist, I found that I got really into sort of the underlying biochemistry of pruning and grafting and apple trees and fruit tree growth in general. And as a result of that, sort of found that I got to the point where I was able to sort of teach what I was doing and just sort of get over what I was doing, because I was basically planting orchards and maintaining orchards, discovering old orchards that we didn't know were there, and bringing them back to life. And now it forms probably about 10% of my income now. So this time of year, the picture you've got there is what I'd be doing. So this is it's mainly teaching to communities in community orchards, and there's lots of them. This is just the other side of Leeds from me, in a place called Rothwell, just off the M1. And this is one of these forgotten council orchards that's been left for 15 years. And I got invited in to teach them restorative pruning, sort of bringing it back, the orchard back to life. So unfortunately, because of the COVID crisis, I haven't been doing any of this year. So I've just been out over Christmas and New Year, sort of just pruning all my local orchards on my own, taking lots of pictures, and that's what we've got for you today. But first of all, I want to get an idea of who's in the room, basically. So we've got 54 people in the room. Just going to stop the share temporarily. And if all this works well, I want to get an idea of how much fruit tree pruning experience do you have. So a little survey should pop up on the screen now that will give you 4 options, from I've never pruned to I'm very experienced. It won't tell me who you are, but just give me an idea of the level of experience in the room, so I can pitch what I'm doing. So I'm just going to launch that now. Okay, and I can see that you're voting. Some of you may not be able to vote because of your tech or however you've joined the meeting, but we're up to 96% now. Okay, I'm just going to end the polling, and that will then display it back to you. Okay, so we've got about a third of you who've never pruned, 2/3 of you that have done a bit but are not totally sure, some experienced but want to know more, and one very experienced as well. So yeah, so if you can identify that person, Jenny, and eject them, that would that would make me a little bit more relaxed. But yeah, yeah. So one thing I should say is I'm not an expert. I'd probably say I have a lot of experience just because I've been out and done a lot, but I would probably be arguing with myself giving this same presentation 2 years. I learn so much every year, and there's so much more to learn as well. So I'm sort of on a journey and sort of around the sort of fascinating subject of how do plants grow, but how do apple trees in particular grow as well. Right, so let's get rid of that, reshare the screen. Okay, so that's what about you? And if this is what we're going to cover this evening. So we're going to cover why do we prune, when to prune, how to prune. We're going to look at tools and techniques, which again is a bit more of the how to prune. And then the thing that's sort of slightly different about how I teach pruning is I try and give you an idea of the underlying biochemistry. So what's going on in the plant or what's going on in the tree at different times of year, and how you can then have an idea of, if I do this or make this cut here, or even just bend over this branch, this is how the tree will react. Now, this is different to, and I nicked the picture that was off the Eventbrite booking for this event, which is this here is the traditional sort of picture you'll see in books on how to prune, which shows a tree that looks maybe a little bit like the tree that you're looking at. And then it will say cut here in year 1, then cut here, here, and here in year 2, and then here, here, in year 3. And by then it looks absolutely nothing like the tree that you're looking at. And I find those diagrams very confusing. I can just about work out what they're saying, which is why that I then teach this sort of idea that whatever tree you're looking at, it doesn't need to look anything like a diagram in your book, but that you know that if you cut in this particular place at this particular time of year, this is likely how the tree will react. Okay, so I've got the second of 2 surveys now, which I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to ask you the question, why do we prune? And you've got a multiple choice for this. Stop the share results. And I've got a whole list of different things about why you might prune fruit trees. I want you to pick what you think are the top 3. Okay. And that, oh, hang on, let's just relaunch that. There we go. So you should be able to see that now. All different options about why we might prune a fruit tree. I'm not, good, I'm seeing votes now. Okay, about half of you voted now. Or late rally for reducing vigor. Well,
feels a bit like a race, doesn't it, Mark? Like we're watching the different lines go different.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, it looks like restrict fruiting is the UK entry to the Eurovision Song Contest. Okay. Oh, I think that's about it. So I'm going to end the polling there and share it back to you. So most popular is to promote fruiting, and second most popular is to improve productivity. Yeah, I would say that they are all valid reasons to prune fruit trees. And there's a whole lot more, some of which I will refer to as we go through. And the sort of take-home message of this really is there are a myriad different reasons why you might prune a fruit tree, and it will depend on your particular circumstances, the time of the year. It might even depend on the variety of apple, because different varieties of apples react to pruning in different ways. And to a very great extent, it will depend on where your trees are. So for instance, I prune a lot of trees that are in public spaces, and I prune them very differently to a tree that I know is going to be undisturbed before I meet it again next year. And also in the context of, like, is this a tree that needs to provide someone with a living by producing fruit that they're going to sell or process into juice? So it needs to be very, very productive. Or this is a community space where children need to be able to pick the fruit? Or is it a community space where all we're really interested in is keeping the orchard going and running the odd course in there as well? So I'll stop the sharing of those and then back to, so the bulk of the rest of it will be using my shared Miro board. How are we doing? Are we any questions in the chat yet, Jenny?
No, we've lost somebody. Apart from losing somebody, no, we're good.
Okay. So that's what we're going to do. And so I'm just going to basically work my way through that list with lots and lots of pictures and very, very few words. So just sort of reinforce that, why do we prune? So the main reasons that I end up pruning is because, and I do a little bit of work in people's private gardens as well, is I often get faced with a tree that looks like this in the top left here. And this is typically how fruit trees are pruned in people's gardens. But when they get to the point where they start to poke someone in the eye or the neighbor complains, they just get given a haircut. And as we'll see later on when I talk about the sort of underlying physicochemical principles in it, the effect of giving things a haircut is it grows back thicker. So it's the principle of pruning a hedge, really. So hedges become thick and impenetrable because they continually get cut back and just get thicker and thicker and thicker. And that's what's happened with this sad apple tree here, which is gone now. The people who own this house took it out a couple of years and put a silver birch in there. But you can see really, really congested here. And come the summer, this was really, really dark in here and dank. The moisture levels were really high, perfect for fungal growth. So, and this tree was on the shady side of the house as well. So you can't really see it in here, but there was a lot of disease in this tree. So this tree was really, really struggling, producing the odd apple now and then, but really wasn't very happy. So, you know, I would have demolished the house and given it a good hard prune in order to let the light in, and but they decided to demolish the tree instead. So a lot of what I'm doing is decluttering and also effectively correcting mistakes from previous years. Often what I'm doing as well, if you go over to the right here, is removing sort of accidents before they happen. So you'll see here, this is actually a cherry tree. So we've got the main trunk here, and then this side branch here is growing up at a really, really acute angle. This is called the crotch angle in here. And when you get these upward growing branches, you get this thing called a bark inclusion here. So that's not solid wood through there. This bark layer continues down there, and it's a weakness. And particularly in apples and a lot in plums as well, because plums have a tendency to have really heavy fruiting years. If you've got something like this, and this branch here is carrying a huge weight of fruit, you've got a big chance that this tears out. And I've even been through community orchards where they've left their plums unpruned for a few years, and all of the plum trees look like wigwams because the summer has come, the prunes, and then every branch has snapped out and is lying on the ground. So if I'm spotting things like this, and we'll see a few later on, I'll be taking this smaller branch out to remove this weakness. And once that branch is gone, this will heal over, and in a few years' time, you won't even know that that branch was there. So I'm removing these problems before they occur. Probably the other main thing that was on the list there is removing diseased wood as well. And this is probably up here in West Yorkshire. This is the disease I see the most, which is canker. So this area here, if I stop my presentation and get my pen, this bit here is canker. Okay, it looks like someone's poured acid onto the branch and sort of dissolved the sort of living wood around from the outside and just leaving the dead wood in the center. And there is a, oops. Okay, that's what I want to do. Here's another example. So this is a really bad example of canker here. So there's canker there, and you can see down here, the branch has actually died right back. So this has mainly occurred because this is one of these sort of little special trees that that'll sell for a few quid every year. That if I see them, I rescue them and pop them in the corner. But it sat in this corner. It didn't do very well. This Hebe is really competing with it. But I just used it as a place to store cyanwood. If I had a rare variety, I would graft it on. But with the wind blowing, it rubbed against these stones here, which made wounds in, which then allowed canker in. So this tree is pretty much beyond repair now. But we'll look a little bit later.
Mark, there's just an observation. Does canker come from the same word of similar origin as cancer?
Pass. So cancer comes from the crab, doesn't it? Because the idea was it felt like you had a crab inside you, but whether canker is actually derived from cancer in human beings, I don't know. I'll set you that for homework.
Oh, I'll check up.
Right, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So so we've got disease, we're decluttering, we're removing bark inclusions. We're also shaping the tree to be the shape that we want it. So we can get really fancy shapes like here, these various fans and espaliers. And in the old days of traditional nurseries, where every area had its own really experienced nursery, they sometimes even used to plant fruit trees along the front of the nursery and actually write the name of the nursery in the fruit trees. So actually shape the trees into letters and even draft the trees together so they sort of intersected and made letters as well. So you're pretty much in control of what shape the particularly apple trees want to be.
Mark, can I just do another interruption? Sorry, this is a canker interruption. How do we dispose of canker infected wood?
So the traditional advice is to remove it from the site and burn it. I tend to be less strict about that. If it's easy for me to do that, I will. If I'm working on a community orchard in the middle of nowhere, I don't want to be carrying huge amounts of stuff, I'll just go and stuff it under a hedge nearby. Because the idea being that the spores that give you canker are endemic, they're in the air anyway, and I concentrate more on creating healthy trees that if canker lands on a wound, they fight it off. And often the trees I work with, you'll work with really healthy trees, and you can see where in years past they've actually had a canker infection, and the tree has fought it off as well. A bit like some ash trees are now fighting off cholera, particularly if they're being given big doses of fertilizer, like animal urine sprinkled around the bottom. They're able to fight it off. So I don't treat it like biohazard waste. But I don't chop it up and leave it on the ground below the tree. But I concentrate more on creating healthy trees that are not bothered if there's canker around or not, because it's pretty endemic here. So going back to these shapes then, fans and espaliers, for growing against walls, they are a particularly good way to grow fruit trees. I mean, here where I am in West Yorkshire, putting a fan against a south-facing wall is a bit like planting the tree in Nottingham. It's given it 50. It thinks it's 50 miles further south. It makes that much difference. And then growing along wires and fences, and again, you could do this on walls, cordons, where basically rather than a fan, your tree is just one fruiting walking stick. So that's quite a good where you want a variety of different apples, but you've only got a small space. And you can even bend the cordon right over so it's just a foot above the ground along the edge of a vegetable bed, so light can still get into the vegetable bed. So we call that style of cordon a step over as well. So the sort of take-home message there is that you can basically create whatever shape of tree you want. Jenny?
Yes, sorry, another canker. Is canker a fungus?
I was thinking about this earlier on, actually. In the books, they call it bacterial canker, and it comes from spores, but bacteria have spores as well. So my guess would be that it's a bacteria.
Okay. And then there's another, that the canker does trace back to the Latin for cancer as well. So
right.
I will follow this up and let everybody know. How's that?
Yeah. I tend to not get I went on a fruit tree disease course a couple of years ago, which was quite interesting for me. But I tend to not, because I don't treat anything. I'm totally organic and holistic in my orcharding. I just tend to remove diseased wood when I see it, and I don't get involved in the treatment of it. And also living in quite a harsh environment. Many of the sort of diseases that you might get in other areas we don't suffer from. So basically, canker is just about it for us up here. And then finally, I wanted to talk about this goblet shape here. So this is the idea that you create a tree that doesn't achieve the height that it wants to, but it's effectively like a hand sitting in the ground. This is quite low, so if you were standing next to this, your head would be about there. So this is perfect for community orchards where you want people to be able to get in. You can get in, you can stand in here, you can prune just about the whole tree, and it's very easy to pick. The idea being with this shape as well, if you think of your leaves as little solar panels that are collecting light and turning them into fruit, by spreading the tree out like this, you're sort of spreading your array of solar panels. Whereas if you've got more of an upright growth, there's lots more competition between it for light. So that's one of the key indicators. Whenever I arrive in an orchard that I'm going to prune, the first thing I do is I figure out where south is, and I look at, right, where's the sun going to go during the day, which other trees are giving shade, which branches are going to be shading out other branches as well. So the light is really important. But also the other nice thing of this open, sometimes called open center, this, you can't really see it. Maybe if we were looking at this tree from above, the idea is that the central trunk there, you would get a radiation of branches out, almost like a wagon wheel. But this center in the middle here is open and light and air can get in. Traditionally, you're supposed to be able to throw your hat through the middle of a goblet tree once you've pruned it. Okay, and I've got some examples of goblets as well. Okay.
The question on the goblet shape from Matt: does the goblet shape require the main trunk to be bent in any way?
No, it doesn't. So the trunk here is bent just because it happens to be bent. So no. I mean, you'll often find that trees on windy sites will be leaning one way, and sometimes if there's a lot of shade on one side, the tree will lean over as well. Okay, and again, that was just an example. This is the textbook description of how you create a goblet tree. So year 1 you do this, year 2, year 3, year 4. Okay, and I just find that really, really confusing. So basically, I just use the principles that I'm going to talk about now to every year think, right, how are we working towards this shape? And it is, you develop a relationship with trees that runs over many years. But just before I leave this bit where I'm talking about why we prune, one of the other reasons we prune is because we've already created an unnatural thing with particularly with apple trees, but with any fruit tree that's grafted. So for instance, there's 3 examples of apple trees that I grafted last year. And this bit below is an MM106 rootstock. This bit on the top here is a particular variety. So for instance, let's say that this is Bramley. So if I take a pip out of a Bramley apple and plant it, I won't get a Bramley apple. I'll get a completely new apple that's never existed before, a new variety, which may be lovely, it may be horrible. So the first Bramley grew from a pip in Southwell in Nottinghamshire. That's what the full name of Bramley is, Bramley seedling. And it rapidly became one of the major cooking apples of the UK. Before then, areas had their own cooking apples. There were some popular ones, like Howgate Wonder was probably a really popular cooking apple before Bramley came along. But Bramley was so big and so easy to store and to transport and things like that it sort of pushed the others out the market. So if I want a Bramley, I need to chop a bit of last year's growth off a Bramley apple tree and graft it onto another apple tree that already exists. And as I said, these are all MM106 rootstocks. So they're a rootstock that I can buy, and I buy several hundred a year. It will produce me a tree of known vigor, of known disease resistance, and everything that branches out above the graft here will be a Bramley, and everything that comes from below here will be an MM106, which I don't want, so I chop them off. So these were all grafted around at the start of lockdown last year. And there's a side graft, an Omega graft, and a Whippington graft, and there are many other grafts as well. So that's another one of the other things I
know, if I just hop in again about MM106, is that we're looking to do some small orchards in the carbon landscape, and we've gone for MM106 just because I know for myself from the trees at the farm that the vigor of the trees is good, isn't it? And they can withstand the weather as well a bit better, or am I wrong in that?
No, that's right. So this picture below here, this mechanical pruning one, that is Dragon Orchard, the orchard that I mentioned in my introduction. This is their part of their cider orchard. So these are Dabinet apples that go into Bulmer's Irish cider. So Bulmer's Irish cider is grown in Ledbury, amongst other places. And these are all on MM106 rootstocks. Okay. They wouldn't be quite as vigorous up here. And it's one of the reasons that I'm experimenting now with M111 rootstocks, which give us a slightly more vigorous, slightly more tolerant of damp conditions, because we're up on the top of the Pennines, it's quite damp here. But the reason I put this picture in is because these trees get pruned every year, but they just prune these like a hedge. So a tractor goes up this aisle here with a big revolving blade on an arm and just randomly slices down the sides of these trees into this Christmas tree shape. And that's enough to keep these trees productive. Okay, and that particular method of pruning is really encouraging fruit buds. So one of the ways that you can encourage fruiting is to cut back hard into young wood, and it will produce fruit buds.
Okay. Mark, how would those apples be harvested? Are the trees shook to get them out?
They are. There's a little thing like a nunu out of the Teletubbies that goes up, and it has a mechanical hand that grabs the bottom of the trees and shakes them really vigorously, vibrates them, and all of the apples drop down onto the ground. And they often leave them on the ground for a couple of weeks, and then another machine comes along, even more like a nunu, with these rubber flippers that just flips the apples into the middle of the aisle and then hoovers them up. And then a lorry arrives at the gate, because you've only got like a couple of hours slot at the pulping mill. So you need to have your fruit ready to go when the lorry arrives to pick it up. So it is quite automated.
There's a question from Lorna. This is about the rootstocks. Yeah. What do the letters and numbers actually mean? So if we think about what MM106.
Okay, well let's scroll down here and have a look at some common rootstocks. So there's a human being there for size, and these are common rootstocks here. So I'm using M111 and M25, particularly for my cider apples. It says M106, but it should be MM106 there. So that's the one that I nearly always encounter if I go into community orchards. And then we've got these more dwarfing rootstocks. So MM106 is semi-dwarfing. These are really dwarfing. There's M27, M9, there's M26 that goes in the middle here. And notice that the diagram here has got stakes in. So the idea being that these particular rootstocks will need staking for their entire life. So the difference in the vigor in these trees, so their potential, how high they might grow, is largely determined by how vigorous their root growth is. So these have got really tiny roots here, which is why they need staking, because they haven't got enough roots there to stop them blowing over in a strong wind. Whereas these with bigger, more vigorous root systems, they can stand up on their own. Although 106, around here, well, I would definitely stake it in its early years. And going back to where the numbers come from, because you notice that some of the smaller ones have got bigger numbers than the bigger ones. So, and it's just, originally, I talked about nurseries before, where basically every area had its own nursery. Also, every area tended to have its own rootstock as well. And they would have got their rootstocks just by planting pips and then looking at what came up and thinking, right, that's a good vigorous tree. I will graft my known varieties onto that and I'll get a tree of a certain size. And then at the Malling Research Station, they decided to sort of formalize and do some research around this. So they called in all these different rootstocks that were being used around the country, and they planted them out in rows. And they even had tunnels underground with glass panels where they could actually measure the root growth over the years. So they measured their vigor, they measured their disease resistance, and then they just chose some of them to be the British standard rootstock. And the number just means it was the 27th in the row, it was the 9th in the row, it was the 106th in the row. And then where you've got an extra M, so M106 is Malling Merton 106. So it just means that it was part of further research trials at a different research station at Merton. So in terms of what you'll see if you go out into a nursery, your sort of standard apple tree that that in a reasonable sized garden where it's going to stand alone with not much else around it, you'd want an MM106, depending on the varieties. Like Bramley's really vigorous. Bramley will go 4, possibly even 5 meters. I know 7-meter trees around here that are on 106. So again, it depends on the variety, how vigorous the variety is. And at the end of the day, you control the size of the tree.
Just the vigor. So the couple of questions. So Jenny's asking, I've heard that dwarf varieties of plants have a greater nutrient density. So I'm guessing she's asking, do they need more fertility, the smaller trees?
I've not heard that. I suppose it might make some sense. One thing you will notice is because these things have got smaller roots, certainly in the early years, they might need watering. And certainly if you've got something like an M27 on a patio in a pot, you really have to sort of give it intensive care. And especially through the dry springs that we've been having the last few years, I've just put in a tender to produce a community orchard for a local council. I've factored in a couple of days time in there in the spring to be going down and with barrels of water to water the trees because of these dry springs we're having. And that's even with 106. Just because when they're first planted, they haven't really established the roots.
And the other thing that's worth mentioning, Mark, I mean, you're probably going to come on to this, but is that they require more space than you think, don't they, MM106? I mean,
yes.
Is it 5 meters between them or something like that? People tend to pack them together when that's the worst thing over the years to do, really, isn't it?
They do. I mean, I'm often going to a lot of mature orchards, and that were planted many, many years ago. And when you've got a thing that just looks like a twig, it's sort of hard to imagine that I need to give this thing 6 meters away from everything else. And that's with 106, I would do 6 meters from the next 106. With M25, I would do 7 meters. And those are the minimum distances. Because what you'll find is that if you do anything less than that, when the trees are mature, they'll be shading each other out. They'll have branches banging against each other where disease can get in. And they'll make the whole sort of area sort of dark and dank. And yeah, so it's best to if you've got the space to put them further apart, definitely. The other thing to mention before I leave this diagram is that they take longer to come into fruit. So when I talked earlier about planting that Bramley pip and getting a new variety, it might take me 10 years before I know whether I've got the new most amazing variety of apple. And probably an M25 here, so the bigger they are, the longer they take to come into fruit. So you might be waiting 6 or 7 years for an M25, whereas with an M9, you might be getting fruit in 2 or 3 years. And some commercial growers are even doing weird things, like they'll have an M25 rootstock, they'll graft a bit of M9 rootstock on top of it, and then they'll graft the variety, and they'll put both of the rootstocks underground. So you'll have M9 roots coming out, M25 roots going out, and the way that is supposed to work is you get the vigor of an M25, so you get a big vigorous tree, but it comes into fruit really early. The downside of it is they're not supposed to last long, so it's almost like battery farming trees. So I've created a few of them. The idea is that I'll put them into orchards that are going to be long-term established orchards that might give me some quick production, but then I'll take them out later on. So I might have 6 meter spacing of M25s and then put something really fast growing in between. Same principle as you often plant alders to sort of get away and generate fertility, but then in later years you'll completely take the alders out once they've done their job and done their because they nitrogen fix. So nearly everything I'm going to show you now is MM106, just because that's what I tend to always come across. But I like to say that in my orchards that I'm creating a lot of cider orchards, I tend to go more for M25 and M111, but M106 seems to do all right around here. Okay. Oh, and I just wanted to show that's what a whip and tongue graft looks like down the side here, which was that picture up there. So you can actually see the zigzag in here where the two tongues have come together and interlocked. Before you push it together and tie it up, that's what it looks like. So that's your rootstock, and that's your...
Do you need a special tool for that?
You can get special tools for it. And in fact, I'm looking at a really lovely one in France at the moment, an antique grafting machine. But he wants nearly as much postage as he wants to buy it. So so Brexit hasn't done us any favor in getting weird and wonderful tools from France. But you can do that. I generally do it with a Stanley knife, but it's safer if you've got a nice sparkly machine to do it. There's even, you can get little jigs that you can put on those little radial arm chop saws that do it as well, that give you perfect joints. If you're doing hundreds of them, like I'm getting involved in a big forestry project that's going to involve alley cropping between trees. We've got to graft about 1,000 in March, so I'll be looking at creating some sort of machine to do that rather than having to graft 1,000 by hand. Okay, so let's get into the chemistry of this. So here's my quick picture that I drew early on of a tree. So this is what your tree will look like if you plant a pip. It will come out and it will just go up as a single stem for quite a while, often called a maiden whip. You can buy maiden whips where it is just this single stem, and if I put my pen on that one there, so somewhere down here, normally about 6 inches above the ground, that will be our graft union there. Okay, and you can see that in quite maturity. As the tree gets older, it looks a bit like a flamingo's kneecap, but then as the tree gets really mature, so like if the sort of 20, 30-year-old orchards I'm working at the moment, you can't see where the graft was originally anymore. So I like to create trees as maiden whips, just this sort of one stick to go in, but people like to buy trees when they go to the nursery. So this is more like what you would buy from a nursery. So this is called a feathered maiden. And the way they've created it, they've actually sprayed this maiden whip. In fact, there's maiden whip, the top chopped out there, with a hormone. to make it branch. So these are artificially forced branches here, just because that's what people expect to see. So the first thing I would do when I plant a tree like that is chop all of those side branches off, unless maybe it was a fan or an espalier, and I wanted a branch there. Now, this is a heritage orchard that I planted with the National Trust. We've got a lot of deer here. So you'll see you'll see this tree later on. I think this is a flower of the town. It's now about 4 meters high. It doesn't have any branches lower than 1.2 meters because that's how high the local deer can browse. Because bear in mind that if we just left this tree and let it grow, that branch there will get thicker and thicker, the trunk will get thicker and thicker, but that branch will always be there. The tree doesn't grow up higher and that branch get up higher. If you've got a branch at 2 feet, you'll always have a branch at 2 feet. So often I'm removing these lower branches or just using them in the early days to nurse the plant, but I'm chasing it up here, especially where I've got areas where I've got deer that I need to get up. Okay, so this is more typical of what I'm planting, especially the trees I'm creating myself. And this is where the chemistry comes in. So at this time of year, where it looks like this, there are no leaves on it. You've got a little tip here where the growth stopped last year. And this is known as the apical meristem, which I've spelt wrongly there. So I'll just change. Okay, and this is a bit like, one of the analogies I use is, imagine this is, people building an old factory chimney, like Fred Dibner style chimney. This is the area where they're laying bricks up here, and the rest of the chimney is not doing anything, but they were laying bricks down here 6 months ago. And then come the winter, they knock off, and then they come back in the spring and start laying bricks again. So that's a bit like what's happening. New cells are being created up here. This is where the growth is going on. There is growth going down here, but it's thickening. So as the tree gets older, it thickens. And as in the spring, when this shoots off again and starts growing up, it will start laying buds out as it goes up. Okay, and there are buds down here as well at this time of year, and they're dormant buds. And I've got an example here. If I stop sharing for a second, so this is something I pruned a couple of weeks ago. So you can see right at the very tip there, something to point, I'll point with the finger, that bit there, that's the apical meristem. Okay, and then there's a bud there, a bud there, a bud there, down, and they actually spiral as they go round. So they're laid down at sort of equal distance, and because of that equal distance, they end up being laid in a spiral as they go down. Other trees do it differently. So for instance, if you look at ash, you'll notice that ash fires 2 buds out, and then the next set of buds fire out at 90 degrees and all the way down that. Okay, and the way that all this happens is through hormones. So it's the concentration of different plant hormones that determine what happens at a particular piece on the bit on the plant. And particularly this hormone that's produced at this active area at the apical meristem called auxin. So when the tree is growing, and then you've got this hive of activity here, as well as laying down new cells and the branch growing up, it's producing large amounts of auxin. And that auxin is descending down the tree under gravity. Okay. And it's suppressing the growth of all these buds. It's saying, you just be a bud. You can put some leaves out, but don't be a fruit bud and don't be a branch. Okay, leaves only. And as it goes down, auxin is destroyed by sunlight. So the concentration of auxin falls as it goes down the plant. Okay, so that message there saying, don't be a branch, don't be a bud, is getting weaker and weaker. Meanwhile, at the same time, you've got apical meristems at the ends of the growing points of the roots as well. And that's producing various plant hormones sort of grouped together under the name of cytokinins, and they're going up the plant. Now, they're not going up at this time of year because there's no leaves. When the leaves come out, water evaporates from the leaves and water gets pulled up the plant from the roots by transpiration. And as that water goes up, it takes these hormones up.
Mark, did you know that the diagram isn't in front of us at this moment?
Oh, no. No, I didn't. Right. There you go. How long has that happened? Yeah. So this is what I took
just a moment.
All right. So apical meristem producing auxin, which is falling down the plant under gravity. Cytokinins going up under transpiration, and you've got relative concentrations of these two here. So this is saying, hooray, become a branch, and this is saying, don't you dare become a branch. And at some point in the plant, the message of this overrides the message of that, and it will produce a branch or a fruit bud. And there are hundreds of different plant hormones that are all doing different things, and it's the interaction of all of them that determines what happens. And it's also the reasons that different varieties are different as well, because they're all producing these hormones in slightly different levels. So which is why you get the slightly different sort of shapes and reactions of the different trees. Now, when it comes to pruning, if I let's zoom in a bit.
Mark, just a question.
Yeah.
I think you've answered it, but just to be clear, so do all buds become a branch? The answer's no, isn't it? No.
No. Yeah. So if you look at a mature tree, and you know, it's about sort of, you know, it's as thick as your leg in front of you. In the bark of that mature tree will be loads and loads of dormant buds. And you could just get a chainsaw and chop the tree off at that point, and those dormant buds will explode into life. You've effectively pollarded the tree. So that's one of the sort of beauties of community orchards, is that it's very rare that you kill a tree, especially ones where you get a lot of damage from kids. I'm often taking them back to just walking sticks, and within a couple of years, we've got big productive trees again. So yeah, not every bud becomes a branch. And if every bud did become a branch, and with some sort of viral problems with plants, that happens, and you just get this mass of shaving brush. So the hormones actually control the size, you know, the structure and the shape of the tree. One of the reasons that we can't just let them get on with it is the fact that we've got this one tree on top of another, and they're trying to do different things. So we've already created an imbalance, and that we're having to sort of keep on top of that, really. So coming down to, and this is going to be like the sort of if you remember one thing about this talk, so remember this. If let's get a more exciting color. Yeah.
Another question for you, Mark. Yeah. Are I can't even say the word.
Cytokinins.
Thank you. Destroyed by sunlight.
Pass. I don't know, but that's what they will have sprayed this tree with down here. I don't know. I would suspect not, although it wouldn't matter if they were. Yeah, it's particularly important with auxin because auxin does other things, like it makes cells really spongy, which is why branches bend towards the light, because the light hardens up the side by destroying the auxin and leaves the auxin on the other side. So it's like getting a sort of thick balloon and a very thin balloon, blowing them up together. The thin balloon will go up bigger, and it will bend the other one over. So that reaction to light is really important with auxin, even down to actually the angles that these branches grow out is dependent on auxin as well. But let's get back to the pruning. So if I make a cut there, I've removed that apical meristem. I've removed that apical dominance that's stopping these buds grow to life. So what generally happens at that point, so if I do that now, nothing happens. But come the spring, when the tree comes back to life, that bud will shoot up. That bud will shoot up. That bud will shoot up and make a branch, possibly even more. These buds down here are more likely to form fruit buds as a result of that. So we might get these fruit buds coming out. And I haven't mentioned fruit buds before, but I'll show you a fruit bud. I'll stop the share again. Remind me to start after I've shown you this bud. Okay, so do you want something to point with? That's a fruit bud there. So they tend to be pointier, and they often come out on their own little stalks as well. If we go back to That's the normal dormant bud there, very flat to the branch, okay, almost like a scale on it. Whereas if we come back here into the 2-year-old wood where the fruit buds are forming, you can see they actually stick out a lot more. Okay, so they're quite distinctively different. Okay, so doing that heading cut there has the effect of the branches near the cut. Remember to share my screen again. Burst into life, and these ones further down are more likely to form fruit buds. So it's one of the ways that you can bring trees into fruit earlier is to be pruning them back continually. One other way to do it, which has the same effect of cutting off that auxin there, would just be to bend that over. That has the same effect as cutting it. In fact, if I bend it over, what will happen is I'll get branches growing up here, because the auxin is still being produced there, but it travels under gravity and it can't get over that hump and do anything. So the auxin stays down there. So you can actually encourage young trees to fruit by just pulling the branches down. So some people do it with a bit of string tied to a brick and just pull the branches down. And when you do that heading cut, it creates this. And you see, remember I said it 1, 2, 3, possibly even 4 buds come out. So there was a cut made there last year. So this was taken a couple of weeks ago. So this time last year, I made a cut there, and then these dormant buds came to life and growed up. And this shape is often known as the crow's foot, because these branches, because they're now, well, hey, we're the top of the tree, they're off. There's nothing really constraining them. And you've got 3 tops of the tree all competing against each other, shooting straight up. And because of this, you get these very narrow crotch angles here. And they can be dangerous later on, because they can create bark inclusions. And in a few years' time, when you've got a big weight of fruit in there, you can be getting the whole branch tearing out. So one of the things you might want to do at this point is just put a little stick across there. And you can actually buy these sticks, little sticks with forks at the ends, and just push these branches apart to open up the crotch angles. That's assuming you want to keep these branches. If this was going to be an espalier or a fan, I would be pulling these apart and tying them into the wall, actually putting little pegs in the wall and tying them. Then let this one go up and then chop that and then take its crow's foot and tie it in to be the next level. So that's one of the key things then. If you cut back to a stub, then the dormant buds below that cut will explode into life. That will automatically happen anyway without the cuts, but it'll happen a lot later and a lot further down. And you can see this tree here on the right. I'll zoom in a bit. This is an MM106 rootstock, which I haven't grafted anything on top of. I've just let it go, mainly because I want to see what MM106 fruit tastes like. You'll often find these in orchards where the graft failed and they didn't notice, and you'll spot a tree and you think that's MM106, and it's quite distinctive because it has these, you can't really see it that well, but there's some there, and there's lots of these little spikes all the way up the main trunk, and they actually are quite spiky, a bit like blackthorn or hawthorn. So quite distinctive of MM106 rootstock. So you can see one where the graft has died and then the rootstock has come from below it. But notice here that I've never cut this. I've just let it do its own thing. So basically it's grown right up here before it set side branches out. And you'll also notice that these crotch angles are very wide, because if you don't chop it and you leave that apical dominance there, so it's still sending down auxin, that auxin makes the inside of these crotches very rubbery, and it actually just the pressure in the plant pushes the branch out. So trees naturally have wide crotch angles. It's only when we chop them and they grow up as this crow's foot that we get this these narrow crotch angles. Okay, am I making sense so far? I'll take your stunned silence as
yeah, no, it's to me actually this is making an awful lot of sense, particularly about the angles, and the sort of yeah, there's a couple of comments going, yeah, it's really helpful. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to this, if I forget me rubber and lose some of this stuff. Now, sometimes I do want to do more than head this, or I don't want to head it at all. So imagine I'm faced with this, and you know, this is about 18 inches above the ground, and I just want this tree to go up and get to 1.2 meters, so it's out of deer range. So these branches here are of no use to me whatsoever. So I will lightly prune them out. So if I go back to my pen here, go back to me pruning color. Now, if I chop them there, and you'll often see this, chop them down to a stump, there are still dormant buds here, and I will get vigorous new growth here. Some pruning systems actually do this. They'll let this grow, and they'll let this live for 3 years and produce some fruit, and then they'll chop it right back hard and get a new branch. So they're continually, they haven't got any wood apart from the trunk older than 3 years on them, called renewal pruning. However, if I want to remove it completely, right, and I'll zoom in a bit to do this. Okay, you can actually see some fruit buds there. So actually doing that, doing that heading cut last year encouraged these, but also encouraged a couple of fruit buds there. So what I will actually do, if I want to prune this, and to just leave that one and take these 2 branches out, I will cut these like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about taking whole branches out. So that one where I chopped it across is a heading cut, and these are thinning cuts. So thinning cuts is removing wood with a view to not encouraging any new growth. Heading cuts, you want new growth. And particularly this time of year, it's very easy to generate new growth with your cuts. But ideally, these ones
can I jump in with a question, yeah. Mark? So it's just sorry, I miss. This is not me. This is from someone. Sorry, I missed where the auxin comes from. Is it natural or is it dabbed on? It's the natural part of the trees.
It's natural, yeah. The apical meristem is producing it. So basically, it's almost like the bloke building on the top of the chimney, shouting down the chimney, "Don't be building any chimneys out the side because we're working up here." So it is a naturally occurring thing, yeah.
Yeah, so, that's great. Thank you.
And if I get rid of that one up there, so if we make these cuts here and take these branches out, there's still auxin coming down here that is still now suppressing all these buds. Okay, but if I chopped there, that auxin isn't going back up, so these dormant buds will explode to life, and we'll see how that's useful to us later on. Okay, let's move along a little bit then. So the only one with a bit of text on there, talk about the different sorts of pruning I do. I do 3 sorts of pruning. So I do formative pruning, which is where I'm starting with that twig or with a feather, where I've got a young tree and it's the first few years where I'm creating the shape that I want it to be for the next 50 years or so. So I'm also encouraging growth because at that point, I'm not bothered about fruit. I just want to get the tree big enough and ugly enough that it can start producing fruit later on, even to the point that I might be rubbing out any fruit buds that appear at that point. I'm not interested in the tree wasting energy on fruit. So I want a lot of vegetative growth at that point. Once I've got the tree to the shape I want, I'm doing this is probably what I mostly teach, this maintenance pruning, where we're just saying the tree is roughly the shape it wants to be. We're just going to keep it ticking along by a bit of pruning every winter. And again, this is probably one of the other things. If you remember nothing else, then if you chop and leave a stump, it'll explode into life. Is the 3 Ds and a C, or 3 Ds and an X. So when you look at a tree and assess what you're going to do in pruning it, you remove anything diseased, anything dead, anything damaged, and anything crossing. So that's anything that's basically where you've got two branches trying to be in the same place, or branches growing back into the middle of the tree. And I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And then often I'm going into orchards that have been neglected for years, and I've got a bit like that tree I showed you right at the start, where the tree has become really congested and closed down. That there's, you know, it grows a couple of millimeters at the end of a million branches every year, and there we're generally taking whole big chunks of the tree out to bring it back into life and open it up. So calling that restorative pruning, and it often takes a couple of years to bring an orchard back from that.
Mark, we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Isn't the cutting of any branches introducing disease?
Potentially, yes.
So is there ways to mitigate against that?
There is. In fact, let's just scoot across to a picture over here and zoom in. So this would be a typical wound here after a branch has been removed, and that's open to the air. Now you can still buy paint called Arbex that you paint over this with. The received wisdom at the moment is don't do that. I mean, basically our trees evolved with aurochs and elephants and giant megafauna that just knocked them over, smashed them, chewed them up. And our trees evolved to recover from things like that. So they're quite happy recovering from quite large amounts of damage. And the theory is that if you paint that over, you actually restrict that natural process. And I've seen trees that have been painted over. What that will actually happen here, I've got a picture of a healed branch somewhere. Apologies if this is making you feel a bit seasick. Where is that then? Maybe I haven't. Oh yeah, right next to it. You can see here, these are branches that were basically looked the same as that a couple of years ago, and they've healed quite nicely. Whereas if you painted that, what you often find is that painted surface is still there, and that poisonous substance you've painted on there has gradually become less and less poisonous, and eventually it will start to rot, and the rot will go into the tree. I have also heard that old nurserymen used to, once they'd cut something like this, they would just stick their thumb in the soil and rub the surface with soil. Now, this is something I've been meaning to try some with, and some with trees that don't really matter that much. That sort of makes sense, because there's sort of a lot of the sort of holistic orchard theory is around using the natural environment of the tree, which is very, very fungal rich, and a lot of funguses are really beneficial and fight the stuff you don't want. Even to the point where people make drenches where they get local woodland soil, bubble it up with an aerator in a bucket, and then spray the whole lot over the tree. The idea is that the naturally occurring sort of healthy funguses fight the ones that you don't want. So I quite fancy trying that. But if you just don't do anything, the tree will quite happily heal over. And I've rarely seen a pruning cut become a cankerous cut. I've often seen where, you know, barbed wire is rubbed against a tree or something like that, that it's been an ingress point. But pruning tends to not.
Just so you know, Mark, there's a few observations on the chat. So Cheryl's saying about her granddad used the soil trick. Just so you know as well, they use the soil trick in commercial organic tomato production as well, cut out the botrytis and then rub in the soil.
Oh, right.
One observation about putting clay in the cut as well.
Yeah.
And then Joe's asked about, are we taking the shoulder with the thinning cut? That's a question about thinning.
Okay, so let's go back to me. Go back to this picture. Okay, I'll just skip. I'll skip this bit when I get to it. So this is a thinning cut where I'm taking the branch right back to it, but I'm not taking it as far as I could. So if I cut as much of the branch out as I could, I would potentially be cutting right down there and leaving a really big wound. So what you will see is when there's a branch here, there's a bark collar at the end here. And I say, imagine it's like a branch growing out of an elephant's eye. and you can still see the elephant's eyelid, and then there's a branch growing at it. When you cut the branch off, you don't touch the eyelids. So that's the idea here, is you leave the eyelid and then it rolls round. So this bark collar, I mean, I probably could have gone in a little bit nearer with that one. So yeah, you want to be getting that, but you don't want to be getting out into this. So yeah, leave the collar. And you'll see a little bit later on, there are examples where we might leave a bit more than the collar as well. Okay, so let's have a quick look at tools. So this is what I currently use. So really young trees, you know, a bit like that feathered maiden, all I need is a pair of secateurs. So I've got a pair here of Felco number 2s. I'm just about to invest in these here, which are a pair of Felco number 10s, which are pretty much the same, apart from this handle here. As you actually squeeze it, it rolls round. So it gives you a little bit more extra leverage, a little bit more power. And particularly important, it's when you're doing a lot of pruning, you're a lot less likely to get RSI. So I'm actually finding in later years, after a winter's pruning, I'm getting a bit of RSI in my right hand. So I'm going to invest in a pair of these just to make that easier. But I do find that as I get into bigger trees, an awful lot of my work is done with the saw now. So this is probably one of my favorite saws. This is a silky Gomtaro. Japanese saws are really, really high quality. They are really sharp. I've got a large version of this called a Katana Boy. It will cut down a tree nearly as fast as a chainsaw. They are absolutely amazing. If you are going to get a silky saw, and I also recommend, let's just stop the share a second and show you some of the tools I've got here. So this is a silky fox, little folding saw, so it's easy to go in the pocket. These are only about 20 quid on eBay. So I've got a load of these because I use them in my pruning courses, because if someone leaves 20 quid in the grass, it's not too much of a disaster. But if they leave a 50 quid saw in the grass, then it hurts a little bit more. So, and it's nice and red and easy to see. So silky foxes, if you want just a good quality silky blade that's not too expensive, you can pick these up on eBay for 20 quid. So this saw is not a pruning saw, this thing here, and you'll see it in a few of my pictures. This is an American saw called a Vaughan saw, and this is actually a woodworking saw. And you'll see it has very, very fine teeth on it. So this is really nice for sort of branches about finger size, because one of the problems with the bigger saws is when you start sawing, they just grip and they just wave the tree around. Whereas this, because it's a lot finer, it'll take you longer to saw through, but it doesn't grab it. So this is a nice little, it's very, very thin. So I tend to use this little Vaughan saw quite a lot. Again, you can pick these up on eBay. And if you do woodworking as well, they're really nice for fine woodworking cuts as well. I have tried to use some of the Japanese woodworking saws, but they tend to have a design where they flare out. So they're hard to get into the angles between trees. Just going to reshare my screen.
Mark, just a request. Could you just say what the names of all the tools are again as well? I know you're still going on with them. Yeah.
So this thing here with the black sheath, that's a silky Gomtaro, Gomtaro. You can see that's my Vaughan, so I like Vaughan Williams. Okay, these things here are Felcos. That's a Felco number 2, but you could just as easily use a Felco number 8. This is a Felco number 10, which has that sort of ergonomic handle. And anything else I use is either like a secateur with long handles or a saw on a stick. And this thing that I invested in a couple of years ago is really, really invaluable to me as well, because again, even with a saw on a stick like this, if I'm trying to chop a branch up here, there's a tendency for it to grab on and just wave the tree around. Whereas if I can get up, this is a Niwaki fruit picking ladder. So I can be standing up in the middle of the tree, and it's a tripod ladder. So it's really, really stable, enables me to get in over these deer protections. It's got a really wide base to it. So if you're a community orchard group and you're looking for what can we use some grant funding for, and you've got somewhere safe to keep it, they're amazing. I can pick this up with one hand. It's aluminium. It's absolutely amazing. Japanese fruit picking ladder, Niwaki. Okay, and the only other thing I've got is basically just another secateurs on a stick rather than a saw on a stick. So I've just invested in one of these Fiskars telescopic, so I can get up to 6 meters in a tree with that, so without a ladder. So I just basically pull that handle there down, and the blades at the end top. So so that's what I'm currently taking into the orchard. If I was only taking one tool in a young orchard, I'd just take secateurs. In a mature orchard, I would just take my Gomtaro. Okay.
We've got another question, Mark. Yep. Is there a time of, are you covering time of year for pruning, or have you covered that already?
I'll cover it now, actually. So everything I'm talking about now, really, although the principles are the chemistry is the same, is talking about winter pruning. So we're mainly talking about pruning apples and pears, and everything I'm going to show you is about apples. Just because stone fruit, they're so susceptible to a disease called silverleaf. If we prune them this time of year, they'll react in the same way that I'm talking about, but they're very, very prone to disease. So we don't prune them this time of year. We'll be pruning them in May and into summer. The idea then is if we create a wound, the tree is sort of full of rising sap, and it flushes the wound as the wound bleeds. But the trees should react in the same way to the same cuts.
Next question. Do you clean the tools between trees?
It depends. So I carry with me the alcohol gel now because of COVID, but I carry it because, one, it's a really good way to clean tools as well, because one of the problems you get, particularly with saws, is they get sort of the sap on sort of dries and sort of gums up as well. So the alcohol is a good way to clean it off. It's a good way of cleaning your tools between trees. So if you're being really strict, then clean your tools between trees. I have trained with commercial orchard pruners who don't for apples. They say that they find that it doesn't have any effect for apples because they're creating wounds and the spores are in the air for canker. But they do religiously clean their tools for stone fruit. What I find is when I'm training in a community orchard, even though I say clean your tools between, people forget about it. And so what I find is that they're not doing it. But what I haven't found is that's then caused a disaster, that I've gone back to the orchard next year and found the orchard is full of disease. So it doesn't hurt to clean your tools. I don't think it's a disaster with apples if you haven't cleaned in the winter between pruning cuts.
I've got another question for you.
Yeah.
Should I prune young trees that are about 7-year-olds if they actually need to be moved to a different location? Prune before moving to location, or move to location then prune?
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I haven't got any pictures. I have got some pictures, but I haven't got them here. Let me just scoot over to the side here. And I moved a whole orchard last year of trees that were about 8 or 9 years old. So imagine we've got a nice big mature tree. Oh, I don't like that red. Let's get more of a tree color. Okay. So I've got a nice big mature tree, thick trunk, lots of branches going out. And these trees were, 12 foot high, some of them. And I've got a similar, sort of 3 or 4 foot diameter root ball down here. And I moved a whole orchard like that of about 15 trees. And the way I did it was just before moving them, I pruned them really hard. So I actually pruned them. Oh, let's get a better color on that. So I pruned them there, there, and there. So basically all I was left with at the top of the trunk was a thing like a hand, about the same size as a human hand. And then underneath the ground, I didn't do it quite as much as that, but I pruned these roots back really hard as well. So I had a slightly bigger thing down there. Now, what I'm trying to avoid, so I'm transplanting this time of year, the tree is going to sit there dormant and then it's going to wake up in the spring. If I leave all these branches here, all of those dormant buds are going to at least put leaves out. So there's going to be a huge lot of leaf growth at the start. Meanwhile, down here, even if I've left all of these intact, just by moving the tree around in the air, all the little root hairs at the end will have dried out and died. These roots need a bit of time to recover. And actually, these roots react to pruning cuts the same as they do up here. So if you cut them back hard, they send out loads of new fresh roots. So by chopping both ends hard, I get a lot of new growth, but there's a bit of delay here. So the dormant buds, if I get a different color here. So the dormant buds here, they come out quite big actually. So I'll probably get 18 inches, 2 foot of growth out of that the next spring. But this takes quite a while to develop, and there's still not much leaves at the end of the summer. So it gives the roots down here time to establish. I've even seen trees transplanted in the middle of summer by doing a similar thing, but what they actually do is they lay the tree down for a week or so and they cover the roots with wet sacks to stop the roots drying out, but they let the sun basically shrivel all the leaves up. So they basically kill the top of the tree, but the tree's alive, but the leaves are dead. But there's no transpiration because the leaves aren't green, they can't evaporate water. So when trees die from lack of water, they basically dry themselves out. They evaporate all the water out faster than it can be replaced, which is why trees, they wilt as the water pressure drops. But it's also why trees leaves shrivel up and die. It's the tree's defense mechanism. It's reducing the amount of transpiration to say, basically retreating, like hypothermia, retreating back to the core. So yeah, you can transplant quite mature trees if you just prune them back hard. And like I say, within 2 years, these trees will be producing fruit again. I wish I'd taken some pictures of those now. I just want to check, we are hour and 20 minutes in, Jenny. I'll quite happily keep talking as long as, but I'm sort of conscious that people will have an idea about how long they wanted it to go.
I mean, what we could do is we could take a few questions now, couldn't we? And then keep going for people who wanted to keep going. Does that sound like that? There is a couple of questions that I've been holding back because they didn't seem to be within the subject that you were discussing.
Okay, yeah.
So shall we go for those?
Yeah, let's get them. And if people do need to leave, let us know. But if you've got a burning question, do let us know before you go. But I have still got a few exciting things to show you before the end as well.
Well, let's go for some questions now. Yeah. And then if people then want to leave at the hour and a half, because I know sometimes an hour and a half Zoom is plenty, but then we will keep going. So then it's up to you whether you'd like to stay. So this is one question. 11 years ago, I planted 2 dwarf apple trees opposite each other by the side of my arch. One produces massive apples, the other about 5. What can I do to help the unproductive tree?
Okay, the answer is it depends why it's not producing apples. So it may be that you're accidentally pruning out the fruiting wood. It may be that it's producing blossom, that there isn't a tree another apple tree that's in blossom nearby to pollinate it, whereas the other one is maybe flowering at a different time when another local tree is in blossom. Another reason might be that if it flowers really early on, it might be getting caught by late frosts. So there's a variety called, oh God, I can't remember. It's got a French name, but it's also known as the wise apple because it's one of the latest flowering apples. So it's a wise apple because it waits for all of the frosts have gone before it flowers. So it may just be that it's getting caught by late frosts. It may be that it's not happy. I mean, one thing you can do is you can always overgraft with a different variety. Yeah, I would really need to know a lot more about it before sort of saying definitively why it wasn't.
is there any chance that Minnie, shall I take Minnie off? Minnie, did you want to speak in person? Minnie's got a question, but she's got to go in a minute as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's probably quite an obvious. A lot of people probably know the answer to this. I'm a complete novice, I'm afraid. So it's yeah, I'm right at the bottom rung. So I'm just wondering with the thinning out process. I've always wondered, because I know that it's kind of, you were saying about directing the growth in a certain way at times, but I don't know if you can just kind of maybe sum up a rough kind of idea or the main reason for kind of thinning out. Why are we not letting it just kind of go at all angles? And is it just aesthetics or to? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. There are some people who, like you have no dig gardening, have no prune sort of fruit production as well, and you can just plant a maiden whip and then just let it do its own thing, and it will create a reasonably healthy tree that will go on for quite a while, and you should be all right. But even then, you know, you'll get a bit of damage or a bit of disease. So even if you're just doing those 3Ds, you'll need to do a little bit. I would say if you're not that bothered about making the tree the most productive or to fit a space, then I would quite happily let it do its own thing and just removing stuff if it's diseased or damaged, or if there's an obvious problem, or you know, if it's poking you in the eye as you walk past, without having to worry too much that, oh, what am I going to call this shape, or, you know, does it fit with what the textbooks say? And
Thank you.
and I mean, there's even a school of thought that there's a lovely chap called Phil Corbett who's growing fruit tree on their own roots. So rather than grafting them, he actually manages to, and I've got an example later on of getting them to grow on their own roots. So you haven't got one tree on the bottom and another tree on the top. So the tree is in balance. It's the natural tree, how it wants to be. And there's a theory there that there's less of a need to prune there because you're not continually having to reset the balance between these two competing trees.
Okay, so the main thing, Mark, is productivity. Is it of fruit? Is that, would you say that was kind of, you're encouraging fruit to grow by cutting back? Is that?
That's so commercially, you're mainly looking at, well, it's either productivity or ease of harvest, either by people or machines. So if you go into commercial orchards now, they tend to be grown as very sort of short Christmas trees tied to wire fences, and they keep all the fruit really close, and they are the systems are designed so you can prune them quick, you can harvest them quick, and again, it's a bit like sort of battery chickens but apple trees. Really, it doesn't look like a traditional orchard, but they're just, you know, they're just fruiting hedges. So yeah, and their pruning system, like the Polish click system, will again be different. Again, the tree will be having the same reactions to the same cuts, but the shape that they're creating and the sort of replenishment of healthy fruiting wood is slightly different concept. And we've got other systems like a lot of orchards are known as spindle bush now, where you sort of have a very low framework of 4 sturdy branches which are almost like cordons with the fruit really compact on them, and then this sort of wispy top that just sort of has fruit, bends over, they pick the fruit off it, they chop that branch out, and then a new branch replaces it and bends over. Flop and crop, they call it, or crop and flop, yeah. But that's the spindle bush way of doing it. And every year, you know, there'll be someone comes along with a new system, but it's just, you know, it's just whether, does it fit the machinery? Does it fit the market? Does it fit the people you can get to do the work, really? Because there's a lot of work harvesting apples.
Thank you. I'm going to have to go now, but thank you so much.
Okay, I have recorded this as well, so you will be able to catch up with the bit you missed.
Thank you.
So we've had a request that we keep going, but we've also had a request we have a 5-minute break, which would actually suit me quite well and probably suit you, Mark, as well, wouldn't it? So are you happy? We have a 5-minute break. What time? And we resume it. We'll resume with an aim to finish at 8. Shall we say that? So let's have a 5-minute break, and everyone put yourselves on mute. I'm just going to let my dog out that's mithering me, and then I will be back and we'll restart at 25 to, if that's okay with everyone.
Okay, I'm just going to pause. Remind me to start the recording again. I'll see you all in 5 minutes then. Okay, and I'm going to reshare my screen now. So all I'm going to do now is, I mean, I talked about those, the 3Ds, the diseased, dead and damaged and crossing. And I'm just going to run through typically what I would do with a tree, just applying that test to them as well. And when I teach pruning, I tend to get we have a little bit of theory and then we go out into the orchard and I get people to work in groups and I get them to stand and look at the tree first and sort of run through, is there anything diseased or dead, and we'll take that out first and then we'll step back and look again, etc. So this is just what you would do when you encounter these things. So here's a typical example. So this was this winter in a community orchard. There's very, very little canker in this orchard, but there was this one tree that had a bit on, and again you can see that sort of quite distinctive look there, as if someone's poured acid on it. Go back to pen. So just what I did with this, and there's a before and after picture, but we've changed the angle here. So I could just change the color of this. I could just chop it there, but this does look here like the disease is right down into the joint here. So I'm going to cut it further back. So what I actually did was I cut it there, just at this. So notice there's a new branch here, and that's that branch you can see there. So I've cut it back to a side branch, and that's one of the principles in a thinning cut. If you want to cut a branch back, but you don't want it to regrow, then cut it back to a side branch. Ideally one that's about half the thickness of the branch that you're cutting back. This one's a little bit smaller, but the theory is that this here is now the tip of the branch. It's exerting apical dominance, and it will send auxin back down that branch and keep it dormant as well. Whereas if I chopped there, then I would have had dormant buds back down here that would have spurted into life. So all I've done is I've taken out the disease. And the other thing I'm checking, if I zoom in here, I'm looking at this clean cut end here, and there's nothing in there. If the canker has gone back down the tree, you'll actually see it as a dot, normally, well, as a brown dot in the middle of it. So I'm fairly certain that I've removed the canker and it hasn't gone back down the tree at this point. So I'm happy. So normally with canker, I'm basically chasing back down the trunk until I'm into clean wood without canker in it. Sometimes I'll take the whole branch out, and I'll show you in a minute what I do when, if there's nothing down here going on, I'll just take the whole branch out, but we'll bring a new branch in to replace it.
Sorry, Mark, to interrupt. Yep. It's a possibility of me asking a question because someone's got to leave in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're really
you want to ask
an
them,
answer.
just bring them out.
So, can cutting a tree back extremely hard stimulate growth from root suckers? I have cherry and plum trees throw up suckers after a major cutting, I think. Is it dependent on the root stock?
Cherries and plums in particular are they really do like to sucker. They'll send new branches up from the roots. There's one orchard I'm clearing at the moment that's just been abandoned for years, that had a few plum trees in it, and now those plums cover about an area of about sort of 25 yards by 25 yards, just sending up these like walking sticks all over the place. And they do make nice walking sticks as well. So yeah, with plums and cherries, yes. Apples tend not, they'll tend to send something up from below the graft, but they won't send anything up from the roots.
Yeah, I think the sucker, even when we don't prune ours at all, and they still sucker. So I don't think it's any act that you do. They just sucker, don't they?
Yeah, they're just happy to be alive, aren't they? Yeah. So that's canker. So I just want to show you, this is a sort of general decluttering now. So assuming that like I have in like the community orchards, where over a few years we've created a goblet shape. So this is what I'm confronted with here. And again, with my, I'll just be looking at, there's no disease, there's no damage. All I'm really doing is getting rid of this stuff that's growing back into the middle. So I'm chopping those out, taking them out completely down to the elephant's eyelid, and I've taken a couple out in the middle there as well. And this is what I'm left with at the end of it. So I've got that open shape that I can throw my hat through at the end of it. Okay. What you sometimes find though, and it depends on the variety, is you can take branches out like this and the tree reacts by firing up loads of new shoots in the middle where there was nothing before. And these are called water shoots. So sometimes if I remove a big branch, I suddenly get a load of new growth in the middle here with shoots coming up there. And even if I chop them out, they come back the next year because there's not enough auxin in here to keep those buds dormant. So what I tend to do with a really vigorous tree like that is I'll just leave one in to suppress the new growth, and then I'll take it out in the summer. And here you can see if you don't do this, so this is down below here is a Chiver's Delight. And this, it really does throw up water. So you can see here from when I last pruned this tree a couple of years ago, it sent up a little shoot like that over the years has then thickened into this. So actually I'm making apple walking sticks out of these at the moment, but I'm clearing those out and I'll probably will get some come back again this winter. So sometimes you just have to keep on top of it. Another thing I want to say, there's a difference. I talked about with that canker chopping back to a branch. Here, I've got a branch. This is one of those branches that's growing back into the middle of the tree that I don't want, but it's got some fruit buds on. So I've chopped it back to a fruit bud, and that has exactly the same effect as if I chop back to a side branch, because these fruit buds produce auxin as well, and they will still suppress down here. So I could have chopped it out completely, but I've left it and I've got some fruit bud. In fact, that's often one of the ways that you produce quite a sort of heavily cropping tree, is to be chopping back side branches to little branches like this, which then become clusters of fruit buds as well. So just to be aware that heading back to a fruit bud will stop any growth down here. But if there's no fruit bud there, and if I just chopped it there, then I would get new branches growing here. And yeah, and often all I'm doing is just taking out the big branch, because sometimes I'll let it grow up, the tree grow up again, and I'll create a second goblet at a different height. Commercial growers sometimes call this sort of area, this cartwheel of branches, the table, and sometimes they'll have a table another meter higher than this. But this is a community orchard where we want people to be able to pick it. So I've taken the center branch out here. You can see there's going to be a nice healthy crop of fruit buds here, so that there'll be a nice lot of fruit on this tree. And I just wanted to show this example here. So this is a very cluttered tree. So this is I can't remember what variety this is, but it's got a very upright growth. So almost like a pear tree, which tends to grow very upright rather than spread out. And I've decluttered it a bit. So this is how I've decluttered it. But you still have effectively still got 5 trees wanting to be in the same space. And so there might be an argument for taking more out there, but actually I'm quite happy because of the amount of fruit buds on there. I'm going to get a weight of fruit, and that will open the tree up like a flower. So the weight of the fruit will pull it out. I mean, I could actually just tie strings to it and pull it out and make it into more of a goblet shape, but the trees naturally do open themselves up under the weight of fruit. And just want to show this. This is the same tree. That's all I did with that tree there, is I took out 2 big branches, and that's them lying on the floor there. So that minus that, sorry, that plus that equals that. Okay, so often when I've got to treat, these are about 8 years old now, these trees. I'm not doing fiddly sort of little, nipping little end. All I'm doing is saying, right, oh, that's a bit congested, just whack, whack with a pruning saw, just taking out 2 big branches. Okay, I'll skip that one and just go into what I've called repairs, renewals, and other stuff. So often when I'm in the orchard, I'm doing other things as well, and I'm repairing. So for instance, here, this is a tree here. That's the original trunk there. About 5 years ago, there was a heavy snowfall, and these had rabbit guards on them. The rabbits got on top of the snow and they completely girdled this tree. So what I did was I had some, it was actually some cyanwood from Bill Sowerbutt's garden of unknown variety that I just happened to have with me because I'd use them for practice wood and my grafting courses. So I just grafted, I stab grafted a new bit of a new branch. So the branches look like this sort of thickness, pencil thickness. So I stab grafted down below and above, and I did 3 of them, and 2 of them took. And you can see now, this is the same thing here. That's the original trunk. The bits that look like this that I grafted in are now taken over as the new trunk. So I've actually repaired this tree from the damage to it by over grafting. So there is more interesting, exciting stuff that it can be doing. Another example of which is, I've called that notching, but that's actually nicking. Where you've got a trunk, where you think, I'd love to have a branch there, and maybe all the branches are higher up, all you've got is just like a trunk that's, you know, up, and you know, all your fruit's gonna be up there, but you think I'd like some branches lower down, or you've had to remove a diseased branch. What you can do is actually make a cut into the tree above a dormant bud. So this is one I did last year, which didn't do anything. This is on a Howgate Wonder, but here's one that did work. So I actually made a saw cut there that went about 1/3 of the way around the tree, and this dormant bud shot out a new branch. Whereas if I hadn't done that, it would have still looked like the rest of the trunk. So a quick and easy way to create a new branch is just to make a cut partial above it, and then this will heal over the next year or so, and you won't even be able to see that that was there. So that's nicking. Notching is if you put a cut below the branch. So if we've got that, if you created that crow's foot where you've got they're rising up, one of the ways you can get them to spread out is to put a notch below. So actually do exactly the same sort of cut below there, and it will make that branch come out at more of an angle. And it will actually make it more vigorous as well, because it's almost like diverting the goodies that are coming up from the roots out into that branch, because they can't bypass it easily. They have to go right around here to get round.
So a question from Joe: does nicking work on other fruits, including stone fruit?
Pass. I don't know. I've never used it on stone fruit. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. My only worry would be creating wounds where you don't need to.
I mean, stone fruit tend to be like a bit more like less orderly, don't they? They tend to be much sort of denser trees, I guess.
Yeah, with stone fruit, I tend to not prune them for shape. Let's just let them do their own thing, and all I'm really doing is taking out a diseased or damaged. Again, commercially, they're grown on quite tall trellises as espaliers. The thing with them as well is they really do react to heading cuts. So if you cut back to a stump, you'll get masses of new growth. So you have to be really careful pruning, particularly plums, because they just fire out so much new growth from it. And commercially, what they do is they take out whole branches right back to the main trunk and grow a complete new branch out. In fact, I will actually show you the principle of that, because that's one of the next things I want to show you, which is here. This thing called a Dutch cut. Apologies for that. I only took this photo the other day. It wasn't until I got home that I realized that it's slightly out of focus. But here I'm removing whole branches, and particularly this is how I might reduce. Imagine that I've got a lovely branch out here where I want a branch, but I've got to cut it off because it's full of canker. So rather than cutting back to the bark collar here to remove it completely, I've left all of this out here. This is known as a Dutch cut. And there are dormant buds in here. And the idea being is if I leave this undersurface here with dormant buds in, they will spring into life and I'll get a new branch. And because it's coming from underneath, it grows out at a wide angle. If I get a branch going from there, it will go straight up like a water shoot with a narrow crotch angle. So if you have to remove a branch, but you want a new branch to be there, one of the ways you can do that is to leave this Dutch cut. So I've done that quite successfully on trees around here. So it'd be interesting to see next year when I go back to this one. This is a Ribston pippin, I think, to see if we've got a new branch going out there. The other thing, yeah, just two more things to show you is, again, to sort of deal with those narrow crotch angles, you can tie things down as well. And here, I've actually tied down a new branch, which was up here interfering with branches above it, with the idea that if I tie that down after a few months, that will set into that new position. I can take that tie off, and then I can cut this branch here, and this branch will replace it. And it's quite a good way to use water shoots. And you see here on this one, here's a water shoot here that was growing straight up. And this is again is a ribston. No, sorry, this isn't a ribston position. This is a escapes me. It's named after a famous Quaker. But this tree was really, the surrounding trees had really overshaded. It was full of canker. So we basically chopped it back to a walking stick. So all of these are new branches. And here, even this branch that we left has become cankerous. So now I've just tied in one of those water shoots there with just a bit of plastic bag around there. So next winter that will have set there, and I can chop this whole branch off there, and that branch will replace it. And that's nicking, notching, and then finally, I'm going to show you something you don't see very often, is sometimes in your travels, you will notice that the trees that you're working with, let's look at this picture over here, have, and it's often mistaken for canker here, you get these sort of like rough patches here. And what these are actually is little dry rootlets. So this is a variety called Fillingham Pippin. And it's one of the few apple varieties that you can just take a cutting from it, stick it in the ground, and it will root and grow. Most apple varieties won't do that. You need to graft them onto something else, but Fillingham Pippin will strike from a cutting. And other varieties that do, you particularly often notice this stuff on it. Now, when we pruned this tree last year, we wanted to take this branch out because it was too low. So when we remove this, the deer will be able to get in. And rather than take it out last winter, what we did was got a load of moss, wrapped it around the bottom of the trunk, wrapped a bin bag around it and tied it up with string. And then when I undid it this winter, the bottom of that, which had looked like that, had sprouted all of these roots. So we've air layered this apple tree. Okay, that's with the bark completely off. Those are all new roots in there. And then if I scroll across again, that's it after I've taken all of these water shoots out, so you can actually see what's going on. And then I've chopped the whole branch off. So if I zoom in, that's it. So basically I've got a new Fillingham Pippin tree. So that's healed in at the moment, and that will go into a new community orchard that I'm planting this winter. So you can create quite sort of sizable new trees off some varieties of apple, including Fillingham Pippin. So that's just the air layering from start to finish. And just then finally, the take-home messages are, if you remember nothing else, is that heading cut. So a cut there last winter created all of this new growth here. So a heading cut encourages new branches if you do it in the winter. If you made that cut in the summer, it would encourage fruit buds. So where the timing of the cut is quite important. And you tend to use this heading cut on younger trees where you want to create branches that you're going to bend out into a shape or whatever. Whereas a thinning cut, where you're taking whole branches out or going back to a fruit bud, the idea is you're just removing stuff that you don't want, and you don't want to encourage any new growth. So, and again, you tending to do that on older trees as well. So you're encouraging new growth in younger trees, and you're often just suppressing growth in older trees. And the other thing as well is that when I go into a community orchard, they've often got funding for me to do a winter pruning course. So we'll do lots of cuts that produce lots of new growth like this, and then we'll come and have to cut 2/3 of it out next winter because we don't want it. Whereas if you come back in the summer, you can chop these any branches that you don't want out in the summer, as early as, you know, once you see there's a branch there, and if you don't want it, you can cut it out. So the tree doesn't waste lots of resources in putting a branch that has to then, you know, grow for a whole year before you take it out the next winter. So if you remember nothing else, just remember that cutting back and leaving a stump will encourage lots of new branches. And if you don't want lots of new branches, just take the whole branch out that you don't want. And then finally, I won't go through this, but I will send you a link to this Miro board. And I've just put a load of resources on here. So Natural England do these technical information notes on traditional orchards. So there's a general introduction to pruning, an orchard summary, and then there's more stuff like formative pruning of young trees, and then the maintenance pruning that mainly I've taught. So they go into a lot more detail with diagrams in there. So if you want to read more about it, and then that's my Facebook page as well. So if you want to ask me any questions, then you can go to that. So that's it, really.
Brilliant, Mark. So we're got some questions, and we're going to try and do them quite rapid fire, I think, because you know, you've been so generous with your time. Any difference in pruning methods for tip bearers?
Yes. So generally, it's one of the reasons that I do this sort of modified renewal pruning, where I'm taking out whole branches, because if you're cutting, tip bearers produce at the end of the second-year-old wood, whereas other varieties produce, you know, along the whole length of the 2-year-old wood. So if you're chopping tips off, then on a tip bearer like Bramley, then you run the danger of you're continually removing the buds that are going to be fruit in the next year. So, but if you I mean, you're not bothered about fruit in young trees, so I'm pruning for shape then, and often I'm pruning trees where I don't know what the variety is, and you know, I've got to wait a bit to find out whether they're tip bearers or spur bearers. But if you're removing whole branches only, that I'll take a whole branch out if it's diseased, dead, or dying, or crossing, then it doesn't matter whether it's a tip bearer or a spur bearer. It will still produce whatever. But what are those technical information notes? The maintenance pruning goes into quite a bit of detail on how to treat the difference between tip bearers and spur bearers. It's quite interesting.
So with the agroforestry project that you mentioned, I'm presuming that's the Kindling Trust, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any opportunities to help with volunteering?
I don't know, actually, because I haven't started with it yet. I would imagine so.
I would as well. So could they contact you via your Facebook page? Would that be the best?
I wouldn't go through me for the agroforestry thing. I would go straight to Kindling Trust. I mean, they're in the middle of their recruiting for their volunteer coordinators, so there will be a volunteer coordinator. Yeah.
So when I send out the email with the Miro board on it, I'll also send out the contact details for Kindling Trust. Yeah. 2 questions about oh my man, I've lost all the questions. So many questions. Crab apples. Problem with woolly aphid, and also does the pruning information apply to crab apples?
So crab apples I tend to leave alone because they're quite happy. They tend to have quite an upright growth, again a bit like pears, but they don't not to open up because they don't have that massive weight of fruit on. Again, I will just look at them and take out anything diseased or dead. I'm not that bothered about the shape of them. They seem to produce, you know, quite happily whatever shape they are. What's the other thing I was going to say?
Woolly aphid.
They're often only in an orchard because the thing about crab apples is they have a very long flowering time. So they tend to overlap with a lot of the apples in the orchard. So people often used to plant crab apples in orchards just to make sure they had pollination for all of the other apples. Woolly aphid, I rarely see it. I saw some last week, and that was the first time I've seen any woolly aphid in Calder. That's Calderdale behind me, by the way. That's where I am. And it basically looks like someone has sprayed sort of artificial snow into sort of cracks and crevices on the tree. As I understand it, a good treatment for that is to just get a bit of cloth with methylated spirits on it and just wipe down the woolly aphid. And if you do that a couple of times, it's supposed to get rid of it.
Next question. Right, you're only allowed to say 5 words. Where to buy apple trees?
Rogers of Pickering, Blackmore Nurseries, me even.
Yeah. And
Depends
I mean,
where you are.
If you're certified organic, then the Walcott Nurseries are the best one for certified organic. I'm just trying to read. Do you want an apprentice, Mark? Next question.
No. I don't know. I never thought about it.
But perhaps opportunities for volunteering with you. Perhaps that's probably
yeah. I mean, if you live near to me, I quite often go out. I let people know when I'm pruning, and I do a lot of community-based pruning as well.
So that's near Calderdale.
Yeah.
How should heading cut be made for newly planted graft or scion tree?
So if you're just at that point where if you've just planted this, so imagine that all this is a twig. I would quite happily just do nothing to it. Traditionally, what you would do is take your secateurs and just do a sloping cut above the bud, and then we'll get that crow's foot 1, 2, 3. So the idea is that you'd either create those and you'd either tie them out because that's the shape of the tree you wanted. So if I was doing an espalier against a wall, I would make that heading cut and then tie in those side branches and then let the other one go straight up. The other reason I might do that is if I'm trying to chase the tree up to a reasonable height to get above browsing animals. The harder that's one other thing I haven't mentioned, that is the principle is the harder you cut this back, the more vigorous the regrowth. It's almost like a rebound from it. So you can be cutting back hard, getting vigor, 2 or 3 foot of new growth, then cutting that back hard, and you're chasing the tree up, but you would leave those side branches there just until the next winter, because they sometimes call them nurse branches because they've got leaves on and they're feeding the tree, and but you just take them out later on. They're just there as temporary branches.
So, and I think we're going to leave it at that. I just want to say, absolutely wonderful. I love apple trees. I've found tonight, I'm sure everybody will agree with me, absolutely fascinating. Thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and answering all the questions as well. And yeah, absolutely fabulous. So if we'll leave it at that. Mark is in the position to blitz the talk, I guess, but if everyone just wants to put a few comments in the chat function, we've got I don't know if you can see those, Mark, but there's people saying thank you, I've learnt lots, really informative, really well run as well. Yeah, I would agree with that. I've sat through a lot of these presentations, so is Liz Taylor. Actually, we're becoming experts on what's really good and not. Tonight has been excellent, absolutely excellent. So thank you to everybody, and hopefully you'll enjoy pruning your apples this winter. I know we'll be doing ours in the next few weeks, so lovely and nice to hear the science. Absolutely, it makes it all make sense as well. So thank you very much. Do you need to do any housekeeping, Mark, or you've just got to stop your recording, I guess? So I'm not going to be rude, but I've got my